Hello and welcome to another episode of the O3C podcast, coming to you from O3C Games. My name is Jonathan Dunn. I'm in a very, very empty office, and I'm joined by Chris Dow.
Grab your high sensitivity stylus.
And we're going around the world in 80 games. Announcement. Before we dive into this month's offerings of gaming chit and gaming chat, we just wanted to point you in the direction of our website, o3c.games. Did you know you can watch all our video content on there? Did you know you can listen to every fucking episode of the podcast on there? Did you know you can read our articles and reviews on there? And did you flipping flopping know that you can also support us through the website too, o3c.games/support? Then you can send us some money, pledge a regular amount, or simply just share links to the podcast, our videos and articles on your social media platforms of choice. Need the money, keep the show going, make this room look pretty. Honestly, every donation, it'll contribute to something nice in the background of all of these shots. If you're watching on the video, if you're listening on not video, just oh god,
just leave it there. Leave it there.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
We are in France. The Olympics and Paralympics are behind us now, but French gaming chat lies ahead of us. But it lies way ahead of us because we've got so much stuff to catch up on. We're not even going to start by talking about what we've been playing because of how much has been going on in the gaming industry in the last month. Specifically, looking at Sony's decisions. So we're going to begin with a look at the State of Sony, State of Plays of Sony States. State of Sony. Chris, what the fuck happened with Concord?
God. I'm no expert on any industry stuff, like neither of us are. We keep up on these things, but we're not experts. But it sure does look to me like Sony invested 7 years of development and approximately $200 million into Concord, being a live service, online only, pretty blatant Overwatch copy that they then pulled the plug on after 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks, I think. It was about 12 days.
Refunded everybody.
Mad. Absolutely mad. It's unprecedented for a publisher of this size. Like, Sony and a whole bunch of publishers, to be honest, watched games like Overwatch and then Fortnite get massive. However many years ago they kind of had their big boom, and essentially saw them as just infinite revenue streams, and then just bet the farm on striking gold with their own unproven IPs in what was at the time already an ever-growing and kind of immediately overcrowded genre of that sort of games as a service thing. There are industry reports going around that Sony were concurrently funding the development of 12 different games as a service titles, and the only one that's released and done quite well was Helldivers 2. Outside of that, Concord launched, immediately shut down. Others are kind of MIA. We never even heard about them. Some are on life support, like the Splatoon copying Foam Stars. I think that was also Sony. That was just bombed on release. And, a bunch have just quietly been cancelled, and we'll probably never ever hear about them until we have some expose in 10, 15 years' time.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, in the last couple of years, we're seeing this big boneheaded shift to this model result in these just dead on arrival empires of dirt, not just from Sony, but if you think about Suicide Squad and the reception that's got, as much as I enjoyed the bits I played, the live service stuff was not well received. Skull and Bones from Ubisoft was a stinker. Lawbreakers a few years back came out, immediately had no player base. Evolve, Anthem, there's lots of these games.
But also, there's no correlation with the quality of the game. Because, Concord got fairly decent reviews. Got like 7 out of 10s, 8 out of 10s, I saw as well. And it was like, the game's really good. The characters are a bit boring. But honestly, you're not playing the games for the story, are you? Name a character in Fortnite.
Well, I mean, Fortnite's an easy one. Just throw a dartboard at any poster of popular characters.
Point, actually.
They're all in there. But I think what's interesting is that neither something like Fortnite, or if you think about Destiny, is obviously a huge game in this kind of field. They weren't just immediate successes, and their success was also not a predictable thing. So it seems strange how much Sony have kind of tried to lean into this kind of thing to then fail. those games have gone stratospheric in a way that their publishers, I don't think, could possibly have planned for to the scale they have ended up. And a lot of them had wonky periods of development or fallow periods before them being rejuvenated by updates or reworks, things like that. Like, most people won't even remember that Fortnite launched, it didn't even have the Battle Royale mode. It was like a player versus enemy online thing. It was an unmitigated failure. Like, Epic were like, right, back to the drawing board, lads, because this is a disaster. And it took copying another genre and game completely to suddenly be massive. But it meant they had to kind of do something and invest some time and thought and money into saying, right, what do we do to kind of try and make something of this? And even early Destiny that I did play for, I don't know, probably only 10 hours when it first came out. But it had potential, but it felt really barren. It didn't have any of the kind of the thrust people enjoy now, the big multiplayer stuff, you know, all the infinite leveling opportunities and stuff like that. I think Concord, for that reason, is particularly astounding because, yes, it's kind of failed, and that can happen with these games. But by the industry's volatility that dictates, it's been cheaper for Sony to just shoot the project in the back of the head after less than 2 weeks than to try and do anything with it. And that seems quite worrying in terms of what is going on in the industry just generally at the moment.
Yeah.
Because people have dedicated huge chunks of their lives to making Concord and other games like this. You know, if you're a developer that's been at this team for 7 years, it's probably pretty miserable to just rock up to work one day and be told, bad luck, gang. That's you fucked, that is.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere, because I'm sure this was not a massive consultation. This was just higher ups have said we're done. And then that's it. And there's hundreds of people that would have worked for tens of thousands of hours just to be told, no, you failed. And it's not necessarily their failure, because like you said, reviewed kind of okay. It's Sony's hubris and other publishers' hubris that is causing this kind of big, not kind of, what's the word? It's not going to cause like an industry crash or anything like that, but it's definitely going to make many, many projects fall to pieces. And a lot of people lose a lot of money and time before we get back to some sort of, you know, level tabula rasa we can rebuild from. It's just, it's a strange time, I think.
Well, if Concord was a cataclysmic disaster, then what's happened since then for Sony makes even less sense, because Sony have just unveiled the mid-gen console refresh that we knew was coming. That is the PS5 Pro. It's more powerful.
Yeah.
It's saying the ray tracing will be better. It's saying you won't have to choose between high resolution or high frame rate anymore. And there's AI-powered upscaling tech to make all games look and run better without needing any sizable patches or updates. A few things to note here. One, firstly, I thought that being able to have games in both 4K and run at 60 frames per second is what we were getting with the PS5.
That was certainly the promise.
Because we had to choose between the two on the PS4 Pro, and so it's puzzling that this still isn't actually a thing.
Yeah.
And also, Rockstar have come out and confirmed that GTA 6 definitely won't run at 4K and 60 frames per second on the PS5 Pro.
Yes.
Follow-up. Looking at the comparison videos they showed in the presentation between the graphical upgrades, I can't tell the difference.
No, and that's not just because we are ocularly challenged.
No, but it's like there was nothing in there that made me go, oh, okay, third.
Yeah.
It cost 700 fuck wanking quid. For,
with no disk drive, remember?
With no disk drive, so that's 800 dick splitting quid.
And no vertical stand if you do want to have it.
850 quid. And the AI-powered upscaling that they showed off, one of which was saying Last of Us Part 2 remastered, which is a remastered PS4 game. I mean, I don't give a shit about any of those games. I've already played the ones I want to play. It's not going to make them better or more fun to play.
No.
Like, I don't know who is supposed to want this machine. Like, at this price point, I mean, it sure as hell isn't me. It's just spending the best part of $1,000 on a new machine. Build a gaming PC that will probably run rings around the console anyway. There is literally zero reason for me to want to get one of these, even if I could afford it, which I can't at the moment because I just bought a house. And as an avid gamer, who also does gaming, or gaming related stuff semi-professionally, who doesn't actually have a gaming PC, and I'm also an adult with disposable income, surely I am exactly the niche who should be wanting to buy one.
And yet,
honestly, I reckon that the price point was £100 lower before they lost $1 billion cancelling Concord. And there's quick, can we just edit that PowerPoint, please? Just a second. Yeah, add a zero. Even if it was 500 quid, I still wouldn't want one.
I think
the stupid thing is, if they showed off Bloodborne being upscaled to 4K and 60 frames per second on the PS5 Pro,
here's your money.
I'd have happily spunk 800 quid up the wall. It's just who do you think these are for? Who do you think's wanting this? It shows a real lack of connection with its audience, I guess.
I watched it out of kind of a morbid curiosity, because I knew it was not going to be marketed at me. I kind of knew that kind of going in. I don't have too much to add to what you've just said, but I do think, like you mentioned, the pricing is unfathomably misjudged at this stage. There's talk that the PS5 is still, even at its current price, a subsidized machine. So Sony are losing a bit of money, assuming they'll make it back on software and PS Plus and whatever. The Pro, on the other hand, is projected as being sold essentially at cost value, which is why it's got this higher ticket price. But this has never, to my knowledge, been the case for a consumer console. I could be wrong. Again, I'm not an industry expert, but as far as I'm aware, even the super expensive PS3, when it was launched, they were taking a loss on those machines because it was just the tech at the time. We hadn't scaled up to where we are now. The second point, that it doesn't include an optical drive as standard, I think is really troubling for multiple reasons. One, it boosts the price even higher for those that need one, first and foremost. But I think this could mark the end of physical game sales completely for next gen if it sells even averagely well. If the attach rate for drives is a bit lower than it could be, I think Sony would just say, well, we won't bother next time. We're just going digital. And a greater concern, though, is that the disk drive conundrum makes me question again, who is the Pro for? Because most of the marketing in the mini presentation was centered around this idea that it was the PS5 you've got is good, but the Pro's going to be even gooder. And it's that was essentially it. And if those considering an upgrade from their PS5, again, someone like the two of us, we are adults with disposable income, we could potentially buy this machine. If we can't migrate our disk libraries from PS4 and PS5, what is the point? Selling to brand new adopters, maybe that's where they think they're going to make the money. But Sony don't have the same thrust that Microsoft do with Game Pass to make an all-digital machine at this stage viable, in my opinion. They just don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the buy-in, they don't have kind of the name recognition for what PS Plus is versus Game Pass.
Yeah.
And that last point, again, like you mentioned, the presentation was so shit at explaining what machine might do well. And if the benefits are so infinitesimally small, so as to need to pause a frame of gameplay and zoom it in 20 times to see a slight increase in clarity, what's the point? Genuinely, what's the point? I'd bet massive stacks of money too that outside of some first-party Sony stuff, cross-platform games are still going to end up targeting lower specs, like you've just said for GTA.
Yeah.
Because no matter what the Pro is going to represent in terms of power, developers still need to offer some sort of parity, not only to now base PS5, but both Xbox machines. The Series S is significantly weaker than the X, which is, therefore significantly weaker than the PS5 as well.
Yeah.
And in some cases, multi-platform devs are also still thinking about low-powered hardware like the Switch or the Steam Deck if they're releasing on PC at the same time. So I don't think people care. I don't think people care enough to make this product worth, like you said, close to £1,000. It's just, what is it?
I know. I haven't seen any opinions of people saying, actually, I'm really excited for this.
No.
And I spend a lot of time, at least reading gaming communities and stuff like that. Certainly among the professional journalism and things, I'm just nobody's saying, actually, no, hang on, guys, there might be onto something here. Nobody is saying that.
No.
And you think, at what point in the development of this console did they do any sort of what do you call it?
Proper market testing.
Market testing.
Yeah. focus grouping or anything like
focus grouping, anything like that. I mean, either they didn't do it, which is stupid, or they did do it and went, fuck it. Either way, bad decisions.
The response that I was really, really shocked by, I watched quite a lot of Digital Foundry content on YouTube, and they're all about kind of picking apart, tech performance and stuff like that. They're all about oomph and sheer power generally. They're the people that will say, bit disappointing it couldn't hold 60 frames per second, it did drop to 59, and a few choice examples and that kind of thing. And yet I watched an hour-long chat for several of their hosts basically saying, who is this for? What is this price? What is the point? And if you're not even appealing to the people that are very much the ones who want the best stuff, I don't know. Will it be a total flop, or is it going to surprise us and actually fly off the shelves like the fucking PlayStation Portal, which I think is maybe the most unnecessary piece of hardware that's ever been produced by any console manufacturer?
Yeah, and still.
I just keep making noises. Generally, it's been a few weeks of just being quite shocked at industry news just again and again. Yeah, strange times.
It really is. It really is. The really crazy thing about this stuff is that this last month, Sony released what is probably the best exclusive PS5 game since its launch.
Yeah.
which is Astro Bot.
Yeah.
And it's really given people a very good reason to invest in a PS5 if they haven't already, because it is worth owning a PS5 just to play Astro Bot.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Because it is one of the very best 3D platform games I've ever played, and it successfully stands shoulder to shoulder with Nintendo's work in that department, which is a phenomenal thing to be able to do. Rewind a few years ago to the launch of the PS5, and Sony released a free game called Astro's Playroom, which was a game designed to showcase the new features of the DualSense controller, haptic feedback, HD rumble, motion controls, touchscreen navigation, advanced audio feedback, and adaptive triggers. What they actually released was the best 3D platform game I'd played in a long time.
Yeah, it was really good.
It was very simple in its setup. You are a little robot who has a laser jetpack, and he can jump and punch, and he can charge up a spin attack. It's even more basic than Mario when it comes to movement abilities. There's no double, triple jumps or backflips or crouch flips or dives. Not even that. You can't even run. But because of how brilliantly it was made, it all felt incredibly fluid and varied, partly thanks to the robotic mech suits you could find and don to give you additional abilities, like being able to roll around on top of a ball, protecting you from spikes underfoot, or having a monkey suit that could swing and grab its way up cliffs, or a little spaceship you could pilot through little mazes. So the whole game, the whole of Astro's Playroom was also created as a love letter to the history of the PlayStation and Sony's gaming heritage. And I still find it a little bit funny thinking that, I just don't really think of Sony as one of the companies with the wealth of gaming history, which obviously shows my age, because it's got 25 years of games and consoles to its name now, and plenty of players have defined their gaming habits on their output. So, in Astro's Playroom, you're collecting PlayStation ephemera, with each of the different zones in the game offering up different generational hardware to collect, and also scattered throughout the level are so many nods and references and Easter eggs to PlayStation's history. It was an extraordinary joy playthrough, and I delighted in reminding myself of its quality with a quick replay through whilst I waited for Astro Bot to arrive. You can complete the main game of Astro's Playroom and beat the brilliant Easter egg of a final boss in about 3 hours, and to 100% it and get all the achievements, you're probably looking at another couple of hours of play, but it surely has to be the best freebie game ever, right?
It's got to be right up there. It's great.
Up there with Christmas Nights, Then we waited 4 years for the delivery on the promise of Astro's Playroom, and holy crud ballers, Astro Bot does not disappoint.
No.
It's got the same DNA as Playroom. It feels the same to play. It's still got incredibly tight platforming design built around celebrating the history and legacy of PlayStation. But boy, oh girl, have they stepped things up. I love knowing that I'll get a reaction. It's the stupidest thing.
That was a good one.
For a start, Astro Bot is unbelievably pretty. There is so much detail in this game, so much going on at once, and it all looks so beautiful with its bright, colourful art design, brilliantly witty animations and character design. It's honestly breathtakingly delightful to look at all moments. Like, the game of Astro Bot itself is obviously much, much bigger than Astro's Playroom, with several worlds full of levels and secrets and collectibles and bosses, all with their own individual themes and levels with, their own twists, making every new level you go to just a real joy to explore and experience. So many wonderful surprises that, honestly, it made me tear up because they were just so good.
Yeah.
Which is mad. I was just blown away by just how fun the game is, and when it threw in like an unexpected twist or ability, just grinning from ear to ear. Like, the last time I really felt like that, I mean, there's only 2 games which have really made me feel like that. First of which is Super Mario Odyssey.
Yeah.
And the other, when you throw your cap on something new, and it's just like, well, this is amazing. The other is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And there's so many times in that when it's just like, I'm just going to eat a car. That's absolutely brilliant. Like, the love for the legacy of PlayStation that Astro Bot shows is really wonderful. From flying around in your dual sense shaped spaceship and trying to repair your PS5 shaped spaceship. Half of the 300 lost bots you're trying to rescue resemble classic PlayStation games characters, and the highlight of the nostalgic nods are the final levels you unlock on each of the worlds after beating the boss of that world. And then you'll get a whole level that's themed entirely around a certain PlayStation game.
Yeah,
I'm only on the 3rd world at the moment, so I've only played 2 of these. And even though I've never played Ape Escape, which is the first world's nostalgic pastiche, nostalgic, if you will, I still really enjoyed the level from like an objective point of view and could feel the love for that particular franchise.
Yeah.
Then the second nostalgic level, which is themed around God of War, definitely rang true for me, having obviously really enjoyed the first God of War game particularly. It's so much fun. There are so many brilliant little details from the God of War games that are included here, even down to, like, they've even got like a little bit where you have to go down like a little narrow corridor and squeeze through it.
Yeah, very good.
So good. Obviously, it's not in here to mask loading times, but it made me. I just loved that. It was so good. And like, one thing have been really enjoying is like the general Rayman vibe of the game.
Yeah.
Like the soundtrack has got a similar sort of bluegrass infused tone to it that Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends had. Obviously, the seeking out and rescuing bots is akin to the Electoons system in the Rayman games. And also, when you get hit and die in Astro Bot, he inflates and plays the same sound effect that Rayman does. Yeah, it's just a lovely little nod.
That was my saxophone player there.
That was very good. Okay, Chris is gone. He's left us. He went very, very, very quietly in the night. I've managed to avoid spoilers as to what other games are referenced later in the game. I'm so glad that I've got these to surprise me as I, work my way through the game. And there's also so many references and so many things. I'm like, I know that's referencing something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's fun as well. But all in all, Astro Bot is without a doubt the best PlayStation 5 exclusive game we've got. Out of the 4 of them, this is up there. But like, even though like it has come under a fair bit of fire for mirroring the 3D Mario games a bit too closely at points, that means absolutely nothing to me, because like, all art is inspired by the art that came before, and if you can imitate it successfully, then that is a huge achievement, because how many games have tried to copy Mario outright and failed?
Yeah.
And also, like, when it's like you said, that's what art has to do. It has to build on what comes before. When it's iterated on and infused with a flavour all of its own, it also weaves in so many incredible original ideas that works, feels and plays this fucking well. Just, fuck off. Because this is a 10 out of 10 game, and I hope it makes a shit ton of money, so Sony don't go into administration over Concord and PS5 Pro, so we can get more games of this quality that actually make me excited to be playing games on this console, because those have been very, very few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, what else can I add, really? I think we mentioned Astro Bot in our end of 2023 episode as an upcoming title. It rings a bell that we
Maybe.
kind of brought it up at some stage. And if not, then it would have popped up at some point. And I remember it being one of the only big titles I was genuinely excited for, like this calendar year. And then I kind of forgot about it until launch day. And then when release date appeared, I found a way of picking it up, played it, predict to be great. It will likely be my game of the year, I would say at this stage, like unless something else amazing comes out. That's the short review.
Zelda.
Yeah.
Got Zelda.
We do. But
Indiana Jones.
Oh, that's a point. That could be.
I think that's going to be good.
Yeah. But this is like that. That's my short review. It's very good. Go and play it. I like it a lot. But I did want to try and describe like a particular experience that I had with this game that I'm sure has not been the case for everyone. Although what you've just said about the lack of PlayStation kind of exclusives, it does kind of link to that. Because honestly, this generation between the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles, I think has been the most disappointing generation of my entire life. Like I've never felt as disconnected from mainstream chart gaming as I have here. And I've never seen big publishers act with such disinterest towards their own hardware and ecosystems either, as evidenced by things like the PS5 Pro. Like we've already talked about these kind of Sony blunders and failures. But Astro Bot made me feel a particular disappointment towards Sony, accentuated by the joy it's made me feel towards Sony. Like it's a 2-for-1 there. It's like I feel annoyed because of how much I'm enjoying the game. Like it highlights so many things the PS5 could be pushing and doing with its controller, with its internal architecture, with its operating system. And yet Astro's Playroom was essentially the last thing that did any of these things almost 5 years ago. You know, this game is essentially the same thing. It's a big showcase for what this machine could be doing. And I'm stressing could there because outside of this franchise, where is any of this stuff really getting used? Like multi-platform games make up now, I don't think this is an exaggeration, maybe 99% of the contemporary PlayStation library.
Probably.
And outside of a few developers chucking in like a cursory, the triggers, we can do something with that, couldn't we? Like you get that occasionally, or the lights on the controller. The specifics of the machine are always completely unused. So you've got, some first-party Sony games will play audio through the controller. They might have better force feedback. You've got stuff that does it quite well, like Returnal. But we're talking 1 or 2 games per calendar year in order to justify a machine that costs £500. And with the Pro, it's going to run closer to £1,000, which is it's mad. It's just absolutely mad. Like Astro Bot is such a joy to play. It feels so good. The world is so tactile. Everything is pin sharp. Everything is glossy and smooth. But it's also inventive in a way that we rarely see from Sony Studios either. Like I'm not going to stand up and try and deny the quality of Spider-Man or Ghost of Tsushima or Ratchet and Clank or Horizon or whatever. But the Sony of old, alongside trying to do big marquee releases like that, was also investing in or funding games like Parappa or Ape Escape or Eco or Wipeout or Little Big Planet or Loco Roco, alongside other games
Mosquito
like...
Mosquito Madness.
Yeah, Mr. Mosquito, sorry. But alongside other franchises like Killzone or Resistance or The Getaway or SOCOM or Siphon Filter, you could have the big mature AAA thing alongside these quirky experiments as well. And there's just none of that variety anymore. And as games have become more expensive, both in monetary and time budgets, Sony have kind of doubled down on pursuing a single track, breaking only in temporarily, it would seem, to develop and then cancel a swathe of live service games like Concord. I think, not wanted to just dwell on Concord forever, but the fact that even something like The Last of Us Online, that was in development for years, and then Naughty Dog just said, it's in the bin now. We're not doing that. It's in the bin. Like just trashed after years of work.
Yeah.
It just shows this is all not sustainable. It's not sustainable unless publishers like Sony start balancing releases better and mixing up their schedules to say, here's an Astro Bot, here's something else, like actually trying to create new things and new experiences. You've got to have this mix of franchise stables. Like gaming doesn't have to just be third person open worlds indefinitely. And graphical fidelity doesn't have to be the end goal for every project as well. And looking at kind of the UI of these machines too, consoles don't just have to be utilitarian entertainment machines. I don't need to see ads for YouTubers I don't subscribe to when I turn on my machine. If I'm trying to play Astro Bot, that's not the first thing I need to see. Like if you look at the Switch, the most outdated gaming tech still purchasable. It's still flying off the shelves. The only reason it's slowed down is because every fucker in the world already owns one.
Yeah.
So the people buying them now are the ones going, I could probably have a second one just in case. But it says a huge amount that Astro Bot feels as Nintendo as it does. not by way of pastiche, though obviously, like you said, there are heavy nods to several Nintendo franchises in there, but because of its design and development ethos. Like, it's a game that was driven by fun and ingenuity and innovation and celebration as kind of the core tenets of the experience, rather than rough voice, hidey cover shooter, big expensive cutscene. And yeah, they're the things that drive Astro Bot to be as good as it is. And those are the values that I feel that both Sony and Microsoft have almost all but given up on this generation.
Yeah.
Like you said, I honestly hope Astro Bot sells 50 bajillion copies and gives post-Concord Sony real pause for thought, just to kind of step back and be like, this has actually been quite a big success and was way cheaper than those other games. Didn't take quite as long to make, and it's just better, isn't it? People quite liked that, and just go from there. That will give you that thought for free. Old Kaz Harai at the top, and you can go from there. You can go from there. Sony news out of the way, because we're not just a Sony industry podcast. I assume you've played a game this month outside of just Astro Bot?
I've done a few things. I've done a few things. I wanted to offer up, first of all, some mobile gaming updates, as I've continued to play a lot of stuff on my phone while still in the midst of sorting out my new house, being generally just a bit too busy to sit still for any long periods of gaming.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to start with a game that's actually not a mobile game, but it is an idle game, which is usually best fitted for mobile devices. But Rusty's Retirement is an idle game built specifically to live on your desktop, and it has clocked up, I don't know how many hours, 400-500 hours on my Steam account.
Well, this was the thing. Like, I've seen it pops up every time I'm on my computer saying you're playing this game, and without looking at the store page, because I assumed it was going to be something you were going to talk about, and I wanted to be surprised. Now knowing it's an idle game, it's like, there we go. That's how he's hit 500. What's in a week?
Yeah, because
that's how he spends time.
Because it literally just sits in the bottom of your screen. It doesn't take up much of the screen, especially if you've got two monitors. It just sits in the bottom of my second monitor. And a little robot just whiles away his retirement by running a farm. And you can just let it do its thing, check in every now and again and expand it, plant crops, build upgrades. It's just a lovely little micro distraction that I find very, very useful for when I'm working, because I have ADHD. I frequently need to constantly break my work up. And if I dip into a more meaty game, then I'm likely to take an hour-long break every 5 minutes of work. But Rusty's Retirement is perfect because it gives me 30 seconds of activity to do, and then I can go back to work. It's cheap as chips. It's charming as Chichester Cathedral. It's very nice indeed. I recommend it. It's only a few quid. Get it, put it on your computer. It's lovely. He's there. The only reason that he hasn't been running is because I can't play my Steam Deck when it's running, because it's
it boots you out, doesn't it?
On Steam. Yeah. Over on actual mobile games, a quick update on Slice and Dice. I finally managed to win a run on brutal difficulty.
Unbelievable.
I probably had, I don't know, a dozen attempts every day for the last month, and I literally did it 2 days ago, something like that. I tried on a few of the different modes to do a brutal difficulty run, but I found the choose party mode to be the most promising, because basically you can just choose what you think is going to be the most effective party, and it really helps you sort of nail a strategy. And I got to the final battle a few times. I had an agonizing loss, right at the last moment, where our boss only needed one more hit and I would have got it. But I did. I finally got it. And the weird thing, it was still fun. Even though I literally failed at it for a solid month, I was still having fun. I've now unlocked Hell difficulty, and that is I've obviously had a few goes at it, but it is utterly absurd.
Yeah.
I haven't even looked to see if people have beaten it, or find a YouTube video of somebody beating a run on Hell, but it's ridiculous. But there's still loads of other stuff to enjoy in the game. Another mobile game I've been playing a bit of is called Peglin.
Oh, I've heard of that. That's Peggle inspired.
Peggle Goblin.
Peggle Goblin inspired roguelike type thing.
That's the one.
Yeah,
it was
that's the one.
recently featured in the Nintendo Indie World Direct because it's now got a Switch port coming out. It's a few years old now, but it totally escaped me, which is strange because it's right up my street.
Yeah.
It's essentially a pachinko roguelike RPG. So the pachinko stages, they're very reminiscent of Peggle, and you then accrue different types of balls that have different abilities, and you have to hit pegs on the board, which then trigger attacks for your little goblin to fight through rounds of enemies and bosses attacking you at the top of the screen. It's quite clever in the way that pachinko correlates to your attack strategy, because like certain balls you send through can then target certain enemies in the pack, or they've got different abilities to affect different enemies in different ways. So there's a lot of strategy and nuance to how you can play, which is great. It's an interesting comparison to Round Guards. Do you remember that game that came out a few years ago? I think you rage quit, deleted it when it crashed on you.
That's exactly what I did. I had a run on the Switch that was probably like close to 2 hours long, and I was like, "Oh, I'm good at this game." And then the game crashed, and it was like, "Oh, you've lost all your progress on this game." So I put it in the bin. The Switch days. No, I put Round Guard in the bin. I've never installed it again. As much as I enjoyed that time, knowing that I lost that, it was annoying.
Like, it shapes up to be a pretty surefire hit, but obviously, game-breaking bugs aside, I played a fair bit more of it, but I just found there was a bit of a woolliness to the way, like, the individual pachinko stages were generated that made for just a really unsatisfying experience. You couldn't, play it with the same sort of strategy you played Peggle. Peglin is what I wanted Round Guard to be, and so it's great to have this. I'm playing it on the iPhone. Touch controls obviously work really well for the pachinko stages, just like Peggle. I'm not that fussed about playing it with proper controls. The game's free to download, and then about £7, I think, to unlock the full game. It seems like I've got an awful lot to unlock in the game, so hopefully it'll keep me entertained for a little while. Yet another mobile game I've been playing is called Hideaway Wonders.
Hidden object?
Close. It's a spot the difference game.
Oh, wow,
what it does is it shows you a picture of Spider-Man 2 running on a PS5. There's almost 100 levels to play through in the game, and they're these basically just really thought about that earlier and was like, "Oh, I'm going to do that." I was going to do that when I was anyway. There are almost 100 levels to play through. They're really beautifully presented little scenic dioramas rendered in a lovely 3D low poly, though realistically lit, shallow depth of field tilt shifted style. It looks lovely. And then you have the two different versions of the scene in circles above and below each other. And then when you zoom in and track around the scene, the other version does the same. So it's very, very nice and easy to navigate, and then slowly pore over all of the details until you find all the differences. And the nice thing about the art style, especially with this low poly thing, is it means that a lot of the formations and the people and the objects and everything, they're formed more out of shapes that are much more easily identifiable as being different, rather than just being like, oh, the curve on that man's pelvis is a much more obtuse angle.
Spot the pelvis.
Spot the pelvis. It's much easier, and so it's easier to sort of see the comparison points sort of nice and clearly. It's very therapeutic. I've been enjoying passing the game back and forth with my wife when I get stuck looking for differences. The only downside to it is its user interface presentation. It's clearly going for this whole minimalist, relaxing, mindful experience. But the icons are just nonsensical glyphs. It took me about 10 minutes to find where the settings lived.
Yeah.
More painlessly, each level opens with an horrific, unskippable live, love, laugh style platitude that literally it makes me feel physically livid. I wish you could disable them, because the game would become 400 times. I'm having a nice time.
Yeah.
I'm just playing. I fancy doing that. This one looks nice. This is like a like a sort of a moonlit street. Oh, that looks quite cool. And then it's like, oh, friends are angels who lift us up when their wings have forgotten how to fly. And it's just
Awful.
It's awful. Other
Awful.
than that, it's a nice one. All in all, mobile gaming has been pretty good for me for the last few months. And it looks like it's
Fruitful.
only going to get better because Balatro is now coming to mobile, including coming to Apple Arcade very, very soon. So I don't even have to double dip. I'm just going to download it and start a fresh save file on that and become dangerously addicted to it all over again.
Funny you should mention Balatro, because do you know what I've also been playing this last week?
Well, Balatro?
Balatro, believe it or not. And do you know what I think of this universally liked and critically acclaimed game?
What?
It's really good. I'm probably going to play some more of it. But I'm not going to say much on this because you talked about it a lot a few episodes back. I might bring it up again in a month or two if I'm still going. But equally, you've already devoted probably thousands of words to it on this show. And as a roguelike dunce over here, I can't add anything. I can't add anything useful. So
I like the bear, how it's different.
So, dear listener, if you want to know more, flip back a few episodes. And if you want to know what I think personally, just take whatever Jonathan said, but sub in the odd line about it conjuring like a surprisingly powerful sense of place, despite it just being a card game at its heart. And you're basically there. That's it.
Just imagine it just in a bit more of a nasal tone. More hair.
So something else I have been playing that I'll give a bit more time to. Astro Bot, which we've already mentioned, despite being a big AAA first-party release, is arguably the type of thing you'd expect me to have played. It's quite a me game in that sense. But what would you say, other than, yes, I know you texted about this a couple of weeks ago, if I told you I'd also been playing 2018's God of War?
I'd say, wow, if this was 2 weeks ago, I'd be very surprised to hear this.
I'd be absolutely shocked.
Yeah.
This is obviously another AAA first-party Sony release, represented, as you've already mentioned as well, brilliantly in Astro Bot. But it's also in a genre and style that generally is a lot less in my wheelhouse than a bright, stay-glow, inventive platformer. So, again, like I've done a few times recently, it's always nice to surprise and shock. But God of War is a game that you spoke about at length when it slammed into your top 100 list during our addendum season.
Yeah.
I've heard lots of people talk about it over the years. I've seen footage of it 1,000 times, but I just never thought it would really be for me. Like, looking at that footage, I always got the impression that it was a game of quite technical, almost like Souls-like combat. I thought it would have quite linear environments. I thought it would have, obviously, the expected PlayStation Studios single-player story polish that I've never really connected with. But because I am a sucker for a bargain, and I'm a sucker for adding things to my Steam library to play on the deck, when God of War dropped to something like 12 quid in a sale, I thought, even if I only play it for an hour, if I get an hour's ultra fidelity hacking and slashing, it's probably worth it at that price. And now I'm about 8 hours in. So I've enjoyed it way more than that.
There we go.
And of an evening, Georgia will frequently ask if I'm playing Dad of War. And it's been quite nice to have an experience like that she's wanted to kind of share in a little bit as well. Because, it does, as I've said, it ticks the PlayStation Studios prestige storytelling box. But I think it's doing a lot more than just that, which is why I've kind of stuck at it a bit more. The combat is way more inviting and exciting than I was expecting. And again, you described it really nicely, but to actually play it, it's got really weighty, kind of like Christopher Nolan's Batman style thrust with every kick and slash. It feels heavy. And it's also really balanced from a play perspective, which I appreciated because, as I've said multiple times in this show, I'm pretty shit at most games. So there is timing, there are combos, there's enemy weaknesses and resistances and everything else. But on the regular difficulty, it's also very doable, even if you are just a scrub who's just spamming the same attack over and over like me. So I can get through these big encounters and feel really good, even if I'm not playing that well. You're obviously going to do better with more skill. You're obviously going to have more fun at higher difficulties with more skill, but you won't outright fail with less. And I think that's quite a fine line to kind of get right in a game like this. Many of the harder combat challenges in God of War as well are essentially like optional bits of content, the kind of like rift encounters and things like that. So if I find myself suddenly really clicking with the way it all works, I know I can revisit some of them later to show off my chops. But, then I get more game to play, so it's win-win. I remember when this came out, the father-son relationship between Kratos and Atreus got both a lot of praise and also quite a lot of stick at the same time. And, you know, the silly dad of war joke I mentioned is not George's alone. It was kind of doing the rounds at the time. But playing this a few years out of relevancy, though, in terms of release at least, and at this particular time in my life, it's made me think and appreciate his storytelling a little differently, I think, than if I'd played it back when it was a bit more contemporary. A lot of media has explored this kind of parent-child bond, whether by blood like this or in loco parentis in something like Telltale's The Walking Dead. And there's a definite reason for that, because the idea of caring for or raising another is a very human instinct and desire. And at this stage of my life, you know, I'm in my late 30s, I'm starting to think and plan for the next step in my own relationship and starting a family. It does hit with more relevancy. And not directly, in that I hope I won't be as guarded a parent as Kratos is, certainly in the early stages of this game. And, you know, I hope I wouldn't struggle with the tenderness and intimacy in the way that he does for his own kind of worldview and fears and coping strategies. But all new prospective or planning parents do so with like a bubble of unknowing. And there are things that you can discuss, and there are things that you can infer with your partner. There are lines in the sand you might draw out. But when it comes to it, I think there's a big aspect of survival to parenthood, at least as I observe it in other people. And that sort of feeling is very literal in God of War, because obviously Kratos and Atreus are having to fight off trolls and negotiate tough landscapes and everything. But also metaphorically, because Kratos is having to adapt to this role with his son, having lost his own partner and Atreus' mother and everything else. And it's like there is something to deal with there for him. And he's learning his way, just as Atreus is learning to survive in the wilds as well. Once you add in all the cool environmental puzzles and hidden collectibles and adaptive AI and combat encounters and blah, 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 you know, it's the highly polished AAA first-party Sony prestige single-player open-world game, as all of them are. But it's landing for me in a way I wasn't expecting by virtue of the thematic dressing that holds this all together. And by that, I don't mean Midgard or like the Norse mythology stuff that's powering it, but by it being about family and this uneasy bond between the main characters. And I've really enjoyed that far more than I thought I would. And again, probably because of just where my headspace is now as a 37-year-old man negotiating what comes next in my life. So yeah, I really like it. I hope to play more. It would be nice if I could actually get through it and finish it, but I know it's quite an investment, at least in terms of how I play games normally, especially now that I'm back at school. But still, I am having a nice time. Well done, Sony. So another good one. Put it on the list.
Yeah. It is a very, very good game. I can't tell you how disappointed I was with God of War Ragnarok that it just, I don't know, like it didn't. If God of War Ragnarok was the first game, I probably would have gone, oh wow, this is amazing. But it just felt like playing the same game again.
Yeah, I've got that impression. Like again, from now that having played a few hours of God of War, the footage I've seen of Ragnarok does feel like it's just a snowier, crisper version of that, isn't it? Doing the same thing, really.
Still a lot of corridors.
Yeah.
A lot of corridors. One final game that I'm going to talk about. We're back on the PS5 again, and but it's not a PS5 game. It's a blast from the past, because this is a game from the PS2 era that has been just added to the. I know. It's just been added to the Classics catalogue on PS Plus. I loved playing it back in the day, although I played it on the GameCube. That is Time Splitters 2.
Oh, what a game.
Yeah.
What a great game.
Yeah. Time Splitters 1, 2, and 3, also known as Future Perfect. They've just been added to the catalogue. You could also buy them individually on the PlayStation Store, but it was cheaper for me to upgrade my PS Plus subscription to include the Classics catalogue than just buy one of them individually. So I thought I'd do that and enjoy some retro gaming until my subscription expires in a month's time, or however long I bought it for. I didn't play the first Time Splitters game when it came out, but I played a lot of Time Splitters 2, which was my very first taste of dual stick controls for first-person gaming. And it's a control setup that literally took me 20 years to click in my brain. So it was nice to return to this game feeling like I was in control of it, rather than just sort of like muddling my way through it. Me and my friend Alec at school, who I mentioned the other week as my Super Monkey Ball compatriot and rival, we played a lot of Time Splitters 2 together. I don't think we ever actually touched like doing the multiplayer versus stuff, but we did play the game in co-op, which I absolutely loved. We'd often then take it in turns to get the medals for the different challenges in the game, we also did that with Star Wars Rogue Leader as well. It's a nice minute.
Yeah.
The main campaign of Time Splitters 2 is actually quite short. I probably completed it in about 2 hours. But then there's so much replayability in the game with different difficulties to master. There's secrets to find and unlock. There's challenges. There's now achievements added in to these versions of the game. But like when a campaign is this good, when it's this varied and tight, you don't mind its short runtime. And it comes back a bit to what you were saying last month about how modern games seem to live or die on their potential to entertain indefinitely, because Call of Duty games that come out yearly usually only have like a 4 or 5 hour long single player campaign, and they are brutally lambasted for that, which I think is very unfair. Like if they're boring and shit to play, lambast them for that. Sure, but not for their length. If the quality's there, and it is also not the reason why 99% of people buy those games.
No.
Although I don't buy the games at all, so what do I know? Back to Time Splitters 2. Time Splitters 2 follows the formula of the first game, which sees your main character hunting down time crystals and hunting down time splitters who are systematically disrupting human history by travelling through time. Each level then takes place in a wildly different time period and location, which means each of the levels feel totally different to each other. Time Splitters 2 starts in 1990s Siberia, which is a clear nod to the opening of GoldenEye. The developers, Free Radical, were formed out of ex-devs of GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, the N64 games. But then after that level, you're off to Chicago in the 1930s, and then Notre Dame Cathedral in the 1890s, Planet X in the year 2280, Wild West, Aztec ruins, a robot factory, and even Neo Tokyo in the far-flung futuristic year 2019.
The prospective sci-fi of kind of the early 2000s and late 90s especially, people really thought we were going to make some big fucking jumps.
There was a program in like the 60s called Space 1999.
Yeah.
And that's funny to watch.
Yeah.
Each of the levels in Time Splitters 2 are just such perfect cinematic vignettes. Like they all have a distinct flavour thanks to having era-appropriate weaponry, a brilliant varied soundtrack. They've all got just great dramatically tense stories. They always ramp up well and make for a great climactic rush to every level. Like I frequently felt like my heart pounding because every level just seemed to just like have such great momentum.
Yeah,
it's all brought to life by a really brilliant art design that it is so distinctive even today. If you look at a screenshot from a Time Splitters game, it still looks unlike anything else, and it means it holds up brilliantly too, because they absolutely doubled down and went, this is how we want the game to look, and it looks fantastic. I have made a start on Future Perfect, which opens with much more ambitious level, seeing you playing as part of a squadron trying to clean up the mess left by the end of Time Splitters 2. But I think after that, it appears to be following in the traditional Time Splitters formula soon after, so it's not gone down a suddenly self-serious route. Speaking of which, the Time Splitters games are another example of a contemporary of Halo that totally blows it out of the water. Like, these Time Splitters games, they are just continually fun to play. They've got much more tightly orchestrated dramatic campaigns, much more style, much more fun. They hold up much better today too. Like, if I'm going to return to a first-person game that's over 20 years old, the choices to me are pretty slight, but also very clear. I'm either playing Half-Life or I'm playing Time Splitters 2.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, they are so much more fun than anything else. Also, isn't it so disappointing that there isn't a Time Splitters 4?
Oh, it's savagely disappointing. Over the years, every time there's been so many like half, almost full starts, and Free Radical was still going, and then they weren't. Then they got bought by Crytek, and then I don't even know if they exist there anymore. And every once in a while, there's just like a little whisper on the wind that something might be coming, and then it's always snatched
it's
away.
So good. It's a formula that would work so well.
Yeah.
Like imagine how amazing these different levels could be with all of like the modern tech available. That
On
you
the PS5 Pro.
Yeah. It would basically it would play like you're basically playing like a level from 20 different AAA games.
Yeah.
And obviously they'd include multiplayer, deathmatch, battle royale, season passes galore to keep the children happy. But if we got like an 8 to 10 hour campaign, I would pay full price just for that experience.
I would.
And it would be great. They could even have a level which sends you back to like 2005 where where you have to go and fight off the people who can free radical. I'd love that.
Well, I mentioned in the God of War segment, I'm back at school now. The first few weeks back are one of the toughest points of the year because you have to transition out of the I'm a regular human with hopes and dreams and interests and ambitions mindset that you've been in for the best part of 6 weeks, and accept that for essentially the next 10 or so months, every waking moment will be spent thinking about your curriculum or adaptation in the classroom or pastoral responsibilities. It's really tedious. Unfortunately, that is my whole brain and life now. But the last chunk of holiday is always particularly tough because for me, as soon as I hit the midway point of a break, it feels as if the start of term is like rumbling towards me, and it carries this like almost claustrophobic weight, so that by the time I hit the final week, there's just such inevitability to the academic calendar. It's really heavy going. And I thought I was doing better this year. I thought in the summer I was kind of holding myself together pretty well, having a nice time, switching off, like really kind of taking the time for me, until I found myself typing in our Discord, I've been playing a lot of Tetris recently. And then I realised, brain's trying to tell me something here, isn't it?
Oh dear.
Now, this particular Tetris bonanza kicked off with a specific hardware purchase that I made during the summer. Social media, for some reason, had started aggressively advertising to me what you might charitably call retro handhelds across all of my feeds. And these are the Chinese-made devices by teams like Miyoo or Powkiddy, and they've all got weird names. They will run either Linux or Android. They generally will come stuffed with legally dubious SD cards filled with emulators and ROMs. And with my Steam Deck being my emulation machine, I'd never really been tempted by the ability to play my retro collection using less good and less powerful hardware and tech, until I saw a particular device reviewed called, I'm going to get this right, the Anbernic RG35XX SP. And the SP is the key bit of that mouthful of a title, because this is a near one-to-one recreation of the Game Boy Advance SP. And that was the best GBA for me, Nintendo's lovely little clamshell. And after a rabbit hole week watching coverage of this device, I ordered one for the paltry price of £50.
Wow.
I waited 2 weeks for it to ship from the Far East, and then there it was in my house, in my hand, out of the box. It felt really great. It looked beautiful. I went for a classic Game Boy DMG colorway, like the original Game Boy, and it's got a sort of off grey with pinky purple button accents. Very, very tasteful.
What's called the Anbernic?
The Anbernic RG35XXSP.
RG35XX
XXSP.
Right.
That's the one. The hinge in it, which I was a bit worried about because I thought it might feel a bit cheaply made. It's really smooth. It's robust. The buttons themselves, something I was also worried about, given how Mad Catz or Competition Pro knockoff third-party pads used to feel. They're really good. They feel great. Just fantastic, really. To really get into the weeds for a moment, buttons on a pad or a handheld for any device, they can either be micro-switched, and that's like a classic computer keyboard. They can be rubber membrane switched, which is a slightly spongier quality, but most modern control pads use a rubber membrane. Or they can be dome switched, which is a very clicky on-off input. And the original SP was dome switched, and so the Anbernic SP is dome switched, and it feels excellent. Again, really, really great. Good resistance, really tactile, great for retro games. Software-wise, the out-of-the-box experience is an absolute disaster. It's horrible. The stock user interface it comes with doesn't make any sense. The ROM collection my card shipped with, like a no-name SD card. There's no rhyme or reasoning to its naming, its ordering. The emulators have mixed performance despite the spec sheet suggesting that certain consoles should just fly. But afternoon's tinkering, there is so much potential here. Like I found a replacement firmware called Nuli, that's KNULLI. I erased the entire ROM set that it shipped with and swapped it out for my own curated collection that was on my Steam Deck for the hardware that it would work with. I set up nice screen shaders and overlays to better replicate specific display quirks like the green ghosting of the original Game Boy or the particular bezels of the OG GBA. And I scraped artwork and metadata like I've done on the Steam Deck. And suddenly, this £50 device is now the de facto way I play the majority of 8 and 16-bit games.
Well,
Because there's always been this sense of overkill playing something like Warrior Land 2 blown up on a 60-inch 4K display.
yeah.
Like, wasn't intended for that, was it? That's not how Nintendo expected you to be playing that game. So, you know, if you've got a machine that can play Red Dead Redemption 2 at full settings, but also Tetris at that size from the original Game Boy, it just doesn't work. But having this device that fits so nicely in my pocket, suddenly there's proper synergy between hardware and software, because the hardware just makes better sense for the game that it's playing. Nice bonuses for this device, because again, all these machines are quite variable in terms of what they ship with. The SP has a sleep mode when you close the clamshell.
That was going to be my first question.
Yeah, so it will just put it to sleep, pick it up. There you go, carry on. If
Perfect.
you're playing lighter games, like say Game Boy, Mega Drive, SNES, that sort of era, the battery will easily last between 6 and 8 hours. It supports Wi-Fi, so retro achievements are on the table. I've been having lots of fun playing through games that way. ROM management is really easy as well, because using this firmware, you just click a button and the device appears on your computer wirelessly, so you can just drag them in a folder and it's on there via network. It's just great. The machine's great. Newly, the software is great. Retro gaming is really cool. So the RG35XX from stock is so-so, but with a bit of love, it's astonishingly accomplished and great for someone like me, especially, who likes doing a bit of fiddling to get something going. It doesn't have an analog stick, it's just a D-pad. So kind of PlayStation 1 is probably the upper limit of its capabilities, both in terms of control and in terms of just what it can emulate hardware-wise. But that's still 15,000 games, you know?
Yeah.
I think I'll be okay. But Tetris then, I'm not going to go into detail about why Tetris is so good or why it remains my mental health toolkit game. But on the SP, I've been playing multiple entries in the Tetris franchise.
It's like organising your thoughts.
It is. That's what it does.
I know.
That's what it does. But yeah, I've been playing multiple Tetris entries to try and refine and adapt my classic Tetris skills. Because as much as I love Tetris Effect and to a lesser extent Tetris 99, they're very modern Tetris entries. They've got all the accessibility and quality of life tweaks that the series has absorbed over the years, like the hold piece, the ghost marker, the hard drop, consistent colouring, the rotation, the bag system. That means you're never going to be stuck with a run of 6 of the same pieces and then a 50-piece drought while you're waiting to fill a gap. Like, all of that's been fixed in modern Tetris. And early Tetris entries had none of that. And I've always felt like if I was better at early Tetris, I'd be better at later Tetris. So I just needed the right kind of stars to align to give me the opportunity to get better at early Tetris. So my first SP achievement was beating all the retro achievements for the original Game Boy Tetris. The hardest challenges here were reaching 200,000 points in a single marathon game and hitting 200 lines in one game. And with no hull piece, very little wiggle room once a piece has made contact with the stack at all. Both tasks require extremely precise placement and considered rotation and movement. It took probably 10 or 15 hours of like concerted runs to do it, but it felt really good to finally fell that challenge. Because again, it's like I feel like I've beaten Game Boy Tetris. I've got kind of basically as far as it will go before it's unplayably fast. So that was like a real win. And then next up, a challenge that's still ongoing was to try and beat all the retro achievements for the SNES port of Tetris that came bundled with Dr. Mario. It was like a 2-in-1 pack. The goals here are quite similar to the Game Boy one. There's a few more versus achievements that require shutting out quite tough AI opponents, which I've done. But it's the final clear 210 lines in a single game that I was struggling with, so 10 better than Game Boy. I've reached 208 on 4 or 5 occasions, but the speed at that stage means that a single misdrop or a single tap on the D-pad in the wrong direction is just game over. It's really heartbreaking stuff when you put in like 15 minutes into a run prior, but similar to Slice and Dice, still having great fun. So every time I boot it up, I sit in bed before I go to sleep, I do a few runs, then it's like, maybe tomorrow, and then I turn it off, close the little clamshell, ready for the next day. Finally, a game that I covered back in my Hard Drop video series days, Disney's Magical Tetris Challenge is a Mickey Mouse themed Capcom developed versus Tetris entry for the N64, PlayStation 1 and arcade. I don't love how this one feels, and the quirky block shapes feel a bit like ordering Tetris from Wish or Temu, but it's been a nice challenge all the same, trying to beat the story mode with each character and getting used to, again, a very different feeling Tetris experience. Because as much as if you're not a Tetris fan, they all just look like Tetris, the more of them you play, the more hours you play, the more you realise there's different flavours. There's definitely different seasonings in the Tetris twists. There's other games, of course, but that is where the majority of my playtime has gone. So long story short, retro emulation handhelds actually have a lot to offer if you find the right form factor for you and if you're willing to put in a bit of legwork to customize the experience. And on top of that, Tetris remains just the absolute goat when it comes to managing my own mental health. And I assume that will probably continue indefinitely because, yeah, I've been playing it now for, I don't know, close to 30 years with basically no pauses in that time. And I still have as much fun with Tetris now as I did when I first picked up my Game Boy version that my cousin gave me on cartridge when I visited my auntie when I was probably like 7 years old. So, yeah, great times.
We're at stop 11. This is our 11th stop on our whistle stop tour of
The whole world. The whole world.
Whole world via games. It's France.
Yeah, I've been to France.
What? Me too.
I have been to France.
I think we've been to France together.
Probably.
Normandy?
School trip? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you shared a room with Dev. I shared a room with Paul Limbs. You
win some, you lose some.
Yeah, exactly. I remember people, was it that one or was it Beam House where everyone got freaked out by Ross Keatley's Ouija board?
I think that might be Beam House.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Got all that.
Yeah, oh god, yeah. Straight in the fucking bin. Before we talk about the games of France, do you want to know some facts about the country?
Highlight my month, yes please.
The French invented tin cans, the hairdryer, and hot air balloons. In France, under certain circumstances, you can legally marry a dead person.
What are those circumstances? Did you research that part?
Yeah, as if you had cast iron evidence that they were planning on marrying you, you can then get married to them and then be their spouse. So, like, their will and all the legal stuff then still applies. So
do they have to be at the ceremony? They still have to attend.
Yeah, and then they get a little bit of string just to go, hey, yeah.
Just operating them like from under the table like a muppet.
Yeah. Hand right up it.
It's the only way.
It's the only way. Turning a baguette upside down is seen as very unlucky in France.
Is it?
Apparently. The tradition of wearing a white dress at a wedding originated in France over 500 years ago.
Ooh.
And of course, it can only be known as a French kiss if it is a tongue-led smooch with an authentic French person. Otherwise, it should technically be known as a sparkling gobslopper. What of games, Chris? Tell me of the gaming Frenchman.
Well, our
11th
11th stop on our world tour is by some margin the most fruitful so far in terms of game development, like obscenely large.
It's almost like we've been picking the countries just to reduce our admin, isn't it?
Like, whilst we were really scraping the edges of the jar, arm fully into the peanut butter barrel, looking for unique titles developed in places like South Africa and Ireland. Notable French games are 10 a penny or 10 centimes. Thanks, GCSE French.
Love that.
Instead of just reeling off hundreds of games and going, it's French, isn't it? I've broken this down into like a few tiers of publishing with some honourable mentions thrown at the end to give a few indie titles a nod as well. Because there's too many. There's just too many. So at the top, Ubisoft, and by parent association, Gameloft as well, are industry leaders in the AAA and mobile spaces respectively, and are both headquartered in France, even if they now have a very global span of studios and development houses. Ubisoft's range is stupidly large. If you look at everything they've put their hands to over the years, you have the near annualized open world franchises like Far Cry. What did I say? That's so weird.
Far Cry.
Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and the Tom Clancy's games. You've got the actually annualized Just Dance. Ubisoft are one of the biggest names in publishing with just an exhaustive list of properties. But you can take Rayman, and by extension things like the Mario and Rabbids games. You've got the latter era Driver games were published by Ubisoft. You've got the first two No More Heroes games for something a little bit weirder. You've got the Trials series of 2.5D bike games. You've got the entire Myst series. I didn't realise that outside of the original release. They published everything from Riven onwards. You've got a range of CSI tie-in games. Again, another one I didn't realise, they did the console ports of both Morrowind and Oblivion in the Elder Scrolls series
wow.
Ubisoft published. They did the Call of Juarez series. They did the Wii-era Pets with a Z, shovelware titles. Like, honestly, the list goes on and on and on. They are a big, big name. Gameloft, as an extension, subsidiary, whatever you want to call it, are similarly ubiquitous in the mobile and occasionally console space as well. So they had hits on iPhones and Android with things like the Asphalt racing franchise, which is now on consoles as well. They made the Halo mimicking Nova series of first-person shooters that was like an early success on the iPhone store as well. They've done 1 billion tie-in games for 1 billion different TV and film franchises. And more recently, something that I played quite a lot of, they also make Disney Dreamlight Valley and also Disney Speedstorm, for anyone who gave that one a go. Similar to Ubisoft, not every title is born and bred in France, because Gameloft now are stationed all around the globe. But once more, the central hub, or the headquarters at least, are still in Paris. And therefore, by our metric, these are all French games by some sort of heritage.
It's a massive crane fly in my room.
Is it?
Yeah.
It lives there now. Another interesting player in this A-tier space is Nacon, a group that seems to be on the up and up as they swoop in and acquire team after team after team and license after license. They are primarily a publisher rather than a developer, but they funded and pushed a range of games over the last few decades, including more recently things like the WRC Rally series, the motorbike sim Rims Racing, recent entries in the Vampire the Masquerade series. They published the recently released Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown that I think came out last week. And they also published the Teon developed Robocop Rogue City as well.
Robocop.
Can't be stopped. Moving down to the B tier, we have groups like Microids, probably a familiar name to anyone who likes modern adventure games like Siberia or Beneath a Steel Sky. They published the Jack the Ripper and Dracula games. And they also, which is something you will tangentially know, if you're a fan of either Asterix or the Smurfs, basically anything related to them over the last kind of 20 years has been developed and published by Microids. Again, Paris is their home, but their reach extends to several other countries across Europe too. They're very much a European house. I don't think they do much in kind of the Americas or stuff like that, but, they're still global in that sense. Definitely one of those teams that's much bigger and with a greater sphere of industry reach than you might think glancing at their logo, because it pops up all the time, but you don't really realise just how often it pops up. On a similar level, Focus Entertainment are also Parisian neighbours of Microids, Ubisoft and Gameloft. They were responsible for early entries in the Farming Simulator series, for Trackmania, for the Spin Tires, open world driving games Mud and SnowRunner, all of the modern Sherlock Holmes adventure games, they all come from there as well. Dropping down to the C tier, we're hitting up the duo of Spiders and Delphine Software. Spiders are best known for pumping out B-tier action role-playing games like Bound by Flame or Greedfall or Technomancer, generally well liked by those that like them and shrugged off by everyone else, but they must have a pretty decent audience because the games keep getting made, so they keep on coming. Delphine, on the other hand, are long since deceased, but I wanted to give them a nod for the groundwork that they put into the cinematic platformer genre, because they are responsible for Flashback and Another World and a few other kind of notable games from the early kind of 90s and things like that. A grab bag to finish, literally skimming game titles for a list as long as all of our collective arms. Absolver and Sifu come from Slow Clap, which is French developed. Arcane Studios games like Dishonored and Deathloop before they were shut down very recently, French. Nervous Breakdown and Big Bang Mini, 2 DS games that I really liked, both from Arkido Games, French. And the entire Alone in the Dark franchise as well, all born and raised in Paris. Well, France, but most of them in Paris, if we're being honest. Honestly, we could do 20 episodes on France alone and not even scratch the surface of this stuff. In the interest of brevity, as we likely hit the hour plus mark at least of this episode, what French game did you choose to play this month?
I've actually been playing a game that's not out yet.
Yeah?
It's a game in early access.
Oh, okay.
Which I never play. I never do this. But I've been playing the Rogue Prince of Persia.
Oh, it's pretty in your wheelhouse though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, it like the announcement for it came really out of the blue, following hot on the heels of the announcement and subsequent release of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, announced to be the next big game by Evil Empire, one of the developers of Dead Cells. And It looks set to be a very similar sort of setup with side-scrolling action, platforming, roguelite action in the world of Prince of Persia. It came out in early access pretty soon after, and like I said, I don't usually play games in early access, and I was more enamoured with the prospect of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown that my interest in the Rogue Prince of Persia was dulled a little bit. However, if you can remember, a few months back at the start of the year, I bought, played, finished, and forgot about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which was a adequate Metroidvania
Yeah.
with all right action and platforming, but it also had terrible writing, fairly unoriginal mechanics, too many bugs, and drab presentation to really stick in my memory. And I thought that, well, if this is meant to be the new standard for Prince of Persia games, I probably wouldn't bother dipping my feet in the Rogue pool too soon. But then I thought I'd make an exception for this because, as you know, Dead Cells is, well, French for a start. I needed to play something from France, and there just weren't enough games to choose from.
No, very limited to stop.
But as you know, like, Dead Cells is one of my very, very favourite games. It is a masterclass in action, platforming, rogueliting, design, everything. Extraordinary game. And I wanted to see just how much of a departure the Rogue Prince of Persia was from that formula, and also how it measured up to The Lost Crown, and to see, like, you know, what sort of potential the game had, even in its early access form. Even though I wasn't that taken with The Lost Crown, I've always been really fond of the Prince of Persia series. So here we are. The Rogue Prince of Persia may as well have been DLC for Dead Cells because it's the same game.
Yeah.
What French game did you play? No, it's not quite that derivative, but there is a tenuous story. It unfolds piecemeal between runs as you stumble upon different characters, slowly populate your hub area of the Oasis. It feels like it's trying to take a bit of a leaf out of Hades' book, but the writing really needs to be razor sharp for that to work. And this hasn't really grabbed me, but then it's fine. You know, I'm not really playing this game for the story. But I really do wish that the Rogue Prince of Persia played and felt more like Dead Cells, because this doesn't feel anywhere near as precise, clear, or satisfying to control by quite some margin. The movement mechanics are a bit different, including a wall run mechanic that you have, meaning you can run about on certain sections when you can see a wall in the background. It's usually fairly obvious where this is, but not always. It just feels like a really woolly implementation of a mechanic that works much, much better in 3D. I'd rather just have a double jump. Combat in Rogue Prince of Persia, it's fine. You've got several different weapons and alternate weapons to find and choose from, play about with. It feels decently crunchy, but it does certainly lack something that, I don't know, I just haven't quite put my finger on. I don't really like the dodging system in this because you sort of do a vault over the enemies, which I find difficult to read when there's lots going on. And then you have the ability to stun enemies by kicking them into each other or into a wall. And that works fine as a mechanic, but again, it's just tricky to read at times, especially when there are enemies with protective auras that can't be kicked until their shields are broken down. And I mean, this is all stuff that perhaps will come in time when I've got a bit better and more familiar with the game. But I don't have that sense of feeling like I'm in full control of how I'm playing. And that's always really frustrating because, like, if I die or something catches me out, I'm just like, really? I feel like I did anything wrong there, you know? But yeah. Stage designs are identical to Dead Cells. It's exactly the same way they work. They're obviously procedurally generated maps with branching paths. There'll be a shop, you know, there's treasure chests from other characters. Then you've got walk points so you can travel about, and then some different exits to choose which route you take through a run and which biomes you feel like tackling. Like, the biomes I've played so far, then they're nice, they're varied, and I'm looking forward to getting further into the game to see how much more complex and developed some of the other biomes are, and also to see what, you know, bosses and character upgrades and enemies and all of that are beyond the first big robot boss, which I still haven't managed to beat yet. On the Steam store, it says that the Rogue Prince of Persia is unsupported on Steam Deck, but I've actually had no issues with it whatsoever. I capped the frame rate at 45 frames per second, which is what Steam Deck HQ recommended, and it runs pretty smoothly. There's some frame rate drops that happen in your starting hub area. It doesn't happen when you're in an overcrowded combat situation, so it doesn't really bother me at all. I don't really like the art style they've gone for. It's weird. Like I can sort of see what they're going for, and it comes off looking cheap rather than stylish. I'm not sure like the visuals are going to be beefed up in future updates, but I'm not really convinced by the aesthetics so far. Did you play? Is it Ollie Ollie World?
I played one stage of it, possibly on your Switch at some point.
Very possibly. That feels like what it's trying to do. It's that sort of art style. It's sort of like somewhere between like a flash animated or Samurai Jack style, heavy silhouette, stylized something, but it just doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look great.
That's a shame.
It's a shame, but like these criticisms about the minutiae of how the Rogue Prince of Persia feels and how it looks and how it runs, does feel redundant when the game is in early access. It's like people criticizing deleted scenes on a DVD for being disappointing.
Yeah,
it's like the creators know this. It's why the scenes were deleted, and Evil Empire have clearly labelled this game as in early access to invite exactly this feedback.
Yeah.
So you know what you're buying into. But then, like, I remember when I first picked up Dead Cells, which was before the game had 100 expansions and updates, but it was out of early access, and it felt incredible, and it was wonderful to play the game, and then to watch it evolve and expand over time. And there seems to be a lot of content already in the Rogue Prince of Persia, and I'm going to keep plugging away at it because it's good enough. It's good enough, and I'll continue to report back on how it continues to shape up. I don't know if I can be bothered to like join the Discord and actually feedback stuff because I just don't really like those sort of environments, and I'm sure I don't have anything original to say. That hasn't been said.
Send in the episode. Just send in the episode.
I'll tag them in it.
Yeah.
The feedback's there if they want it. It's
their
decision.
If they want to listen, it's right there.
Honestly, I'm probably enjoying it more than I enjoyed The Lost Crown.
Yeah.
Which just really underwhelmed me. And, whilst we wait for this to reach its final version, we can also enjoy waiting for the long-promised remake of Prince of Persia: Sands of Time.
Never going to happen.
I know. It's a franchise with so much great potential, and I feel that it hasn't delivered in a really long time. It's not like nothing's been a car crash disaster, but I don't know. But don't play the original because that's just horrible to play. You have an hour to beat it. One wrong button press.
Oh, the original Prince of Persia.
Yeah.
So I thought you were talking about Sands of Time.
No, Sands of Time is amazing.
Yeah.
Shut up.
That's what I assumed you were going to say.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Wow.
What French have you done?
GCSE, then largely dropped off after that.
Yeah.
One of the developers I deliberately didn't bring up in the already bloated run into this section was Don't Nod, another dev stationed in Paris, and they are most famous for creating the Life is Strange series, as well as exploring storytelling through quite, a few other interesting experiments as well, like Remember Me, which stars friend of the show Kezia Burrows.
Does indeed.
And Vampire and Tell Me Why. And then Don't Nod shifted gears a little bit in 2023, last year, with a game called Jusant, or Jusant. Jusant, if we're going to do it.
Innit?
If we're going to do it properly, do it properly. Translating this French title, we get Receding Tide. This is thanks to Google Translate, not my aforementioned French GCSE. Jusant takes place on a tremendous, almost completely vertical mountain that we understand to have emerged from the depths of a vast body of water that is now evaporated and parched and barren. And you play a nameless protagonist that arrives at the base of this towering outcrop, and they seem determined to climb to its summit. That's kind of the main setup. In tow, you carry this blue, liquidy creature that kind of sits in a bag on your back and pops out as you start to make your way through the story. Perhaps they are there to restore this place to its previous glory, though 3 hours into the game, I haven't yet found my way to the peak to find out, so we'll see. Whereas Life is Strange was a riff on the Telltale-style modern adventure game, Jusant feels like it's explicitly riffing on the world building and aesthetic of something like the Team Eco games, like Eco and Shadow of the Colossus and The Last Guardian. You've got remnants of a previous civilization that are found in the pieces of environmental mise-en-scène and the diary entries and text logs, all that sort of thing. But the real star of the show is just the environment itself and the way in which you interact and traverse up it. For a long time now, climbing in games has followed the Assassin's Creed or Uncharted format, which is just push in the direction you want to go and your character will run up the wall, essentially. Maybe you have to hit jump every now and again to boost up to a higher handhold, but it's very easy going. Jusant is much, much more hands-on and direct. Actually quite similar to Astro Bot's monkey power-up, in that you need to use your arms independently to find your grips. You're grabbing with your left and right hands using the respective shoulder triggers. But you're also in control of your guide rope, and you can hammer in pitons along the prolonged climb as well, so that if you miss a handhold or a leap, you don't lose all of your progress, but it's still down to you to have set that checkpoint, as it were. It's still reasonably forgiving. This is not meant to be a hardcore simulation, but it hands so much more to the player that it makes each little piece of wall conquered still feel like a real achievement. As you're kind of clambering higher and higher, you learn how to get across overhangs. You'll be monkeying hand over hand with no foot support up kind of overcrops, as it were. You need to sometimes let out your rope to allow a big daring swing. You need to kind of abseil down or leap to quickly cross horizontal spaces. There's quite a lot of things you can do with quite a limited palette of tools. What I found interesting playing Jusant was how different it feels compared to Dontnod's more famous games, because Life is Strange is social and it's chatty and it's wordy, but it's mechanically quite simple, whereas Jusant is wordless outside of written notes, but it's mechanically very dense. Conversation non-existent, and instead this is a game all about the stillness of the space and the echo of every footstep against these undamped or undampened walls and cutaways, and the observation of it all, just planning and executing like a big climb. There's a lot of thought that goes into each little bit that you achieve. I'd honestly say that the text in the little notes and things almost takes away from the beauty of the central concept, because scaling and conquering something so much bigger than yourself is kind of reward enough, I feel. Like I didn't really feel like I needed to know about a previous civilization or who used to live in a cave or anything like that. I just wanted to look at a big cliff and be like, how am I getting up there? It's nice, I guess, that Dontnod thought about the backstory of the whole place, and perhaps when I get to the top there's going to be a big narrative payoff in some way, but I don't think it needed any of it to be a success. I think it's a good game regardless of these other parts. I often say that the games I enjoy the most are the ones where I can just walk around, and this is essentially that feeling, but transplanted going up. You're just walking up a cliff now. The Team Eco influence feels really clear, but I also think this is a game heavily inspired by Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of kind of visual design and kind of just traversal design that I feel comes from Breath of the Wild. And it also reminds me of Lonely Mountains Downhill because of its use of ambient environmental sound, but also the importance of kind of finding your line up as opposed to Lonely Mountains being down. But you're looking at a natural place and you're thinking, how do I get from A to B? By just using kind of my own wiles and using the skills that I picked up playing. I don't think this is a long game, so maybe by next month I'll be able to review it a little bit more fully, but it's a big recommend from me. I've been playing on the Steam Deck, naturally, like I do with everything. It looks very nice on the OLED screen, but I think this is actually a really good candidate for a big 4K presentation because it looks gorgeous. The clean lines, the simple colouring, it should scale very well to a big screen, and preferably an OLED screen if you have a big expensive TV. I think this is actually probably the type of thing I should be playing on the PlayStation 5, but just haven't been. But yeah, great game, and from Dontnod, who are French. So France, 1.5 points out of 2, we'll give them.
Yeah, well done, France.
Yeah,
Bon.
Yeah, and soon, Bonne nuit.
That's France. What's next, Chris? It's your choice.
I'll give you one guess. It's always fun to see if you just are on the same wavelength.
Peru?
Incorrect. We're going to Indonesia, where we will find a limited but aromatic selection of games.
Well, I can't wait to go to Indonesia. That'll be fantastic. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be... I've been kind of picking games that I sort of know about anyway, and I'm excited to maybe just pick something almost a little bit blind and just be like, I'm just going to play that. See what happens.
Do it.
See what happens.
Do it.
So there we go. Why don't you join us next month when we go to Indonesia? In the meantime, engage with us online. You can join us in the Discord. Go to o3c.games. You can find the Discord join link there. There's also links to all of our social media channels. Find us on there. We're at O3C Games on everything. Find us on TikTok if you want loads of great content. She want loads of content. And should we say same time next month?
Yeah, I reckon.